Hey everyone. Previously we looked at the process of installing Node.js on our system. Now that we have Node, we can begin the process of creating our first Next.js project. Next.js is the framework that we're going to be using that's based on Node.js. To get started, the very first element we need is a folder on our desktop. In my particular case, you can see here's my desktop, and I have a little folder called base_code. You can call that folder whatever you want. The next thing we need to do is open up a command prompt. So in my case, I'm using Linux, so it might look a little bit different, but you can use your Windows command prompt to do the same thing. The most important element we need is to make sure that we're in that folder that we just created. In my particular case, I've hopped back here to the desktop, and you'll be able to see that if I want to hop into that folder I created, I can just say cd space base_code. Great, now we're in the folder. As we mentioned before, instead of doing everything from scratch, it's always a very good idea to use those code generators that we can use to actually generate a basic application for us. It generally just means that everything is going to be in the right place before we move on. So the command we want to use is npx create next-app, and then we're going to say what version we want, so at, and then we just say latest to get the latest one. Press enter, and what you're going to see then is a few questions will pop up. So in our case, do we want to proceed? We'll type a Y and press enter, and then it says what is the name of our project. So in our case, let's just call it sample and press enter. Next, we have a choice between using TypeScript or JavaScript. In our case, we're going to be using JavaScript, so we'll leave that set as no and just press the enter key. Next, it's going to ask us, do we want to use ESLint? So what is linting? It's basically static code checks, looking for bugs in the code, using what's called the linting tool. In our case, we don't want it just yet, so we'll just say no. Next, do we want to use the Tailwind CSS framework? In our case, we don't, so we'll just say no. And then it says, do you want to use a source directory? So all our code will be kept in that source directory. So by default, it's set to yes, so just press enter. And then we have the main choice to make. Do we want to use what's called the app router or what's called the page router? And the app router is just a slightly newer way of doing things in the Next.js framework. So let's use that. At the very end, it's going to say, do we want to customize the default import alias? We'll just say no. And what you'll see is it then runs through the process of generating that code. In the background, if you notice, that sample folder was created, and it now says success. We've now created our project. So let's take a little look inside. If we hop into that sample folder, you'll see the basic structure of our app. So at the very top, we've got node_modules. So these are like the individual libraries that have been installed. And if we hop into there, you'll see a few of them. And you'll see there's the next one. If we hop back, you'll see our source folder, and inside of that we've got our app folder. So if we follow into that, we'll get to the very root of our application, and the kind of the welcome page, or what we'll say is like the index page, is called page.js. If we hop back to our command prompt, you'll notice that we're still in base_code, and the actual application itself is in the sample folder. So what people generally do by accident is they try to run the application here by typing npm run dev, and you would get this output telling you that it couldn't find the package.json file or the set of instructions. So whenever that happens, always remember we need to cd into the folder that we've just generated called sample. And now if we rerun that command again, npm run dev, and press enter, you'll see our server has just turned on. And in our case, it's on localhost port 3000. If we open up a web browser and head to localhost :3000, you'll be able to see this default page. And you'll notice there's a little reference here to where this page is coming from. It's in the source app page.js file. So if we want to see that content, we open our project and head to source app page.js. This is the code that was creating that page. Now the most important element of this is our default function that we run. Consider this kind of like the public static void main of a Java program, or the main function. And inside of this you'll see that there's a return statement. And what we're essentially saying is when someone comes to our web page, we want this default function to run, and we want to send back or return all of this content back to our user in the web browser. So although it looks like a lot, we don't have to keep all of this. This is just default boilerplate code. And we can chop all of that away, and then we're left with a very, very basic template where we can start adding our content in here on line 6.